Hi everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I'm here with Dyer Supplier to dye a soft watercolor colorway that is non-repeating and is just a really fun technique. Today we are going to dye 200 grams of the Dyer Supplier Superwash MCN yarn. The Superwash MCN yarn base is 75% merino, 15% nylon, and 10% cashmere. It is so soft and is just waiting to be dyed. So let's go get to it. I pre-soaked the Dyer Supplier Superwash MCN yarn in some plain tap water for at least 30 minutes. And I added on some reusable zip ties to function as an extra tie and an easy, sturdy way to move the yarn around in our dye pot. Today we are going to use a few different colors of Jacquard acid dyes in stock solution form. I'm starting with some 1% stock solutions, but you can dilute it further or just make a non-specific stock. Today we are dyeing by feel, which is so much fun. Here we have our full-size catering steam pan that is atop 2 gas burners on my stovetop, and I love using this pan for different low immersion techniques. I am laying the yarn in the pan and sort of spreading it out as much as possible. Rather than having the circles of the skeins go this way, they sort of go this way, so we have really half of the skein exposed at a time, and we will be flipping the yarn throughout the dyeing process today. I added about 6 cups of water plus 2 tablespoons of white vinegar onto our yarn. If you want your colors to spread out a bit more as you add them, you can increase your water level, and if you want your lines to sort of stay more where you place it, you can use less, like 4 cups or something. Heat the yarn up under medium to high heat until you start to see some movement on the surface. I reduced the heat a little bit, and now we are ready to start dyeing. So just for some demonstration purposes, I'm going to do a line of Jacquard Fire Red that I am going to leave put. And then I'm going to do a second line here, and then coming in with a dedicated dye spoon, I am going to shimmy the water to let that color spread out a bit more. And so as we do this and we go around and we layer the colors, whether or not we let it stay a bit sharper or we help it spread a bit faster, by layering these colors on top of each other, you can see some beautiful blends. But for just this first bit, let's go ahead and wait even 1 minute, and then we'll start coming and adding on more color. After just 1 minute, you can see even now, spreading out this color, we do have a sharper line still in the center. So the colors strike pretty quickly. So you can layer and then move. The ways that you do this can really vary. And you can go for deep saturated tones like a 1% stock solution of the red, or even something that is a lot more subtle. This is also a 1% stock solution, but it is of Jacquard Ecru. So if I move it around, you can barely see it because it's a very non-pigmented color. But you can play around with pigmented and less pigmented colors, just randomly applying it to all of your yarn. I'm coming in now with some chestnut, just sort of randomly and a little diagonally, adding it on, and then coming in with my spoon to help sort of spread this out a little bit and give us that wash of color. And this does not have to be something that ends up feeling pastel at all. We can keep layering on more and more of each of these colors to get something that is still saturated, but that gives you these soft sort of blends between them, and you can get something that still feels almost a little speckled because of the tones in there. Each time I layer on a new color, I am trying to start off by focusing on areas that have less pigment to start. But I also do want to layer things on top of what is already present in here. And you know, you can see this is Jacquard Gunmetal, another color that I absolutely love. It's a very blue, almost sort of deep navy kind of color. and is just a really, really fun tone. And if you're concerned about some of these lines feeling harsh, don't forget that as you move the yarn around, things get broken up. It's a little early really to move things, but I just sort of wanted to show that they soften up as you move it around and expose other parts of the fiber. One big reason why I like to add colors on a diagonal and in sort of different angles is that it helps us get a more non-repeating colorway. Whereas otherwise you might see, if you just did straight across, you might get something that is a bit more repeating. And this is just a really sort of soft way to layer colors over and over on top of one another to create a really beautiful yarn. For this technique, you can keep going and add as much as you want, but it is a technique where you do want to make sure to move the yarn around. And I didn't even necessarily wait very long to flip this, but you can move the yarn around and you can see we do start to get some color penetration to the other side. But we want to spread things out as much as possible and always check around your ties to make sure you're getting nice coverage that you are happy with. One thing to keep in mind is that colors look a lot more saturated when they're wet than when they are dry. So you might decide that you want to add even more color. But moving the yarn around before all of that color has set can also aid with the way that the colors are spreading. And now, I'm opening and checking for more pastel areas, maybe opening up the inside of the skein. And so we can continue the layering. Now, if this is a non-superwash yarn that you're dealing with, you do want to make sure you are gentle so you don't risk felting. This is a really great way to use up leftover dyes or dye stocks that you want to use up. With different undertones and different levels of saturation of colors, you can create something really magical feeling. After multiple flips around, the color is pretty great, but the one place, especially if you're using these zip ties to flip it, that is a place that you might want to double check specifically, because sometimes it can be harder to get sort of consistent coloration through there. And you can come in with even just a few drips of color and to layer in. And each time I do this, I am looking for spots and trying to add things as randomly as possible, but I'm just trying to break up even some of these colors. So then you get something that is very variegated still, although it depends on how much color you end up layering on total, but it almost feels subtle and tonal and very, very fun. And you can even pick some colors that have more contrast than some of what I am using today to bring in different undertones to your colorway. Eventually, you will be satisfied with your color coverage. And while we have 200 grams of yarn in this pot, I would not call them the same dye lot. Because there are some subtle differences to it. So if you were going to knit with this yarn, you would want to alternate skeins every couple of rounds just to make sure there's not like a harsh difference when you switch from one to another. Now that I'm satisfied with the color, I'm going to go ahead and add another 2 cups of water that contains 3 to 4 tablespoons of white vinegar and let this heat on low heat for 20 minutes to make sure all of our color is set properly. It's been 20 minutes and I'm now going to turn off the heat. I believe our water is really, really clear already, but I am going to leave the yarn to cool off a bit in the pan. You could totally remove it right now and set it aside to cool before washing if you choose. However, if there is still some color left in here, then I would let it cool completely in your dye bath, maybe even add a tiny bit more vinegar, so that way you can absorb that leftover color. Once the yarn has cooled completely, we can wash it in some cool tap water. You're making sure that you are rinsing out any excess dye and rinsing out the vinegar. You can add a tiny amount of some clear dish soap to your rinse bath if you choose. Sometimes this is a nice way to check on your color fastness to see if you see additional bleeding. But then after you rinse off the soap, you can hang the yarn up to dry, and we'll be back to look at the finished, completed yarn. Here is the finished dry yarn. The color changes are random and soft, which gives the yarn a real watercolor feel. You can get some large speckles in regions where the pigmented color strikes really fast. So if you want the colors to strike slower, start off with less vinegar in your pan, and you can even dilute the colors more, so that way as you add them, you need to add more liquid overall, but the colors will be softer as soon as you lay them out on your yarn. You can keep going and add more color to make your colorway incredibly saturated. Another thing I really love to do is to create this sort of watercolor base with multiple hues in it, and then go and kettle dye the yarn. And when you over dye it, you keep some of these different tones underneath, which can be really pretty and extremely subtle under a deep saturated colorway. I love layering colors on top of one another so much. And this really is one of my favorite techniques that I reach for over and over. I don't like to leave any dye behind when I'm dyeing yarn, and this kind of layering technique is great for using up extra colors that you had mixed, and you can create some absolutely stunning colorways. I also really like knitting with non-repeating colorways because then pooling isn't as much of a concern. But pooling can be beautiful, and so again, with all of this, you're the artist and you can create your own adventure when you are dyeing yarn. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and if you want to come see me play with even more colors and techniques, you can find me on the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. There will be a link in the video description. Make sure you head over and check out the Dyer Supplier website, dyersupplier.com. They have so many different fun yarn bases that are ethically sourced and affordably priced. And there are wholesale options, and you really should go check it out. In addition to the colors I played with today, Dyer Supplier has all 40 Jacquard acid dye colors on their website. And so it's really a one-stop shop. You can get awesome yarn bases that take up color like a dream, and all the dye you need. So go and check it out. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.